We live in a world in which we face dramatic inequalities, and inequalities that have been rising. Inequalities among different people, but inequalities among different countries. Looking at the last few years, I was, many decades ago, Prime Minister of Portugal. And I imagine what it is to be Prime Minister of Portugal and what it is to be President of Kenya at the present moment. The COVID came. Portugal had a very easy access to vaccines and managed to fully vaccinate its population in a record time. African countries had an enormous difficulty to have access to vaccines, and even when African countries gathered the money needed to buy them, they were not available in the market. Then we had to recover from COVID. And the Prime Minister of Portugal had the support of the European Union, and the European Union printed a lot of money. The United States printed a lot of money, and all developed countries in the world printed a lot of money. I don't think in Kenya there was a possibility to print a lot of money without completely ruining your currency. And when, in the developed world, so much money was printed, that was one of the causes, not the most important one, but one of the causes of the progressive rise in inflation that, after the invasion of the Ukraine, became quite dramatic. And when inflation grows, interest rates grow. And when interest rates grow, a country like Kenya has to pay a heavy price. You couldn't print money, but you are paying the consequences, at least partial consequences, and the money that others probably have printed a little bit too much. Then, my dear friend Kristalina Georgieva, that is very concerned with the problems of the countries and the economies at that moment, was able to convince her board and to print in a different way the special drawing rights. The special drawing rights, thanks to her initiative, and I'd like to praise her courage, pushing for it, but there was one thing she couldn't change: the rules of distribution. So the Prime Minister of Portugal witnessed that the countries of the European Union, of which Portugal is a member, have received 160 billion US dollars for a population of a little bit less than 500 million people. Kenya, the President of Kenya, your predecessor at the time, was part of an African continent with more than 3 times, close to 3 times, the population of the European Union, and that received a total of 34 billion US dollars. And the least developed countries, that represent about 800 million people, almost double the population of the European Union, $17 billion. And we all know that reallocation has been a very complicated thing to put in place. And then, obviously, even if Portugal has a debt that is higher as a percentage of GDP than the debt of Kenya, it is still possible for Portugal to go to the markets and get credit in its own currency. With interest rates, I don't know the last figures, but probably around 4%, and for some time below 0. And for several years in the recent crisis, until the last inflation surge, around 1%. I think Kenya has a different story. You have a lower debt as a percent of GDP than Portugal, but the president of Kenya, when he tries to look into how the markets will respond to their need of financing, has much more difficult to find credit, and will find it at interest rates much higher. I don't know exactly if it is 12, 13, or 15%, but it is much higher. So this is the situation we have in the world. And I compare my own country with your own country. It is clear that my own country benefits from an international financial system and an international financial architecture that is biased, that is dysfunctional, and that is deeply unfair. And so your quest for reform is a perfectly understandable one and something that we must do everything to achieve. By coincidence, we'll be discussing tomorrow afternoon a draft for what I hope will be presented in the next few weeks in the UN to all member states with a policy brief on the reform of the international financial system in the context of preparation of the so-called Summit of the Future, or of our common agenda, as we name the set of initiatives in which we are involved, covering many other aspects, the digital compact, the problems of the agenda for peace, but as an essential focus on the questions related to how to address the dramatic structural inequalities that are embedded in the way our financial system